All of last week, there was this raging debate online on X. I'm there all the time. You're there all the time. But I noticed that while I was focused, very much so on Iran and these military strikes and what was going to come left and regime change and all this other stuff, you were embroiled in a totally separate conversation that I'll admit I wasn't able to plug in as much on that, given everything that was going on during, I guess we're calling it the 12-day war now. And so I wanted to redirect my attention to this now. And we wanted to bring you on because I had so many people reaching out to me saying, so many of our viewers and listeners saying, you got to get the senator on. You got to talk about this public lands bill. I understand the bill as of right now has been essentially taken off the shelf, or I should say put back on the shelf because of the parliamentarian and the reconciliation. But the debate is still ongoing. So I wanted to bring you on to give us your side of it, as well as sort of an overall view of how this got started and then where it stands now.
Thanks so much, Jack, and thanks for letting me talk about this. The debate is ongoing, by the way, in part because the parliamentarian is revisiting the issue today in light of some new information that she didn't have and some new language that we've added. But let me summarize the problem that we're addressing here, and then I'll describe the solution. There's a nationwide shortage that some estimate to be about 7 million homes. It's not acceptable in America. Americans deserve the chance to be able to buy a home, and they need land to do so. Now, coincidentally, the U.S. government happens to own about 640 million acres, nearly a third, between a fourth and a third of all the land in the United States, most of which goes unused and is often mismanaged badly by the government. There are a number of pieces of that land, that portfolio of real estate that has zero recreational value. It doesn't have significant conservation value, value for hunting, fishing, grazing, hiking, and so forth. And for that specific land, and the land I'm talking about here, think vacant lots next to existing residential developments, not national parks. In fact, you can't even have it considered for sale under these provisions if you fit into any of the 15 or so categories of protected federal land, from national monuments, national forests, wilderness areas, national recreation areas, wild and scenic rivers, trails, conservation areas, and so forth. So what's the solution? The solution involves allowing the U.S. government to sell off a limited number of these parcels of land at an affordable price to allow people to build homes with preference toward single-family homes. And this has all kinds of protections in it that make sure that we're not selling off the crown jewels, nothing in any protected status. Again, think vacant lots next to existing residential neighborhoods, and that's what we're talking about. There has been, associated with this effort, a lot of attempts to provide misinformation. There have been maps that have been put out there that are badly misleading about what this bill actually does, suggesting that it would sell all the land listed on a map. The maps aren't authentic. They're not legitimate. Why? Well, because there's a process. There are criteria. It's impossible to come up with a map that describes what is going to be sold, what could be sold under it. There's no way of communicating that accurately. There are instead criteria and a number of processes that people would have to follow. I would note also that a lot of the housing shortage that we're trying to address exists in the Western United States. Remember, the U.S. government owns less than 15% of every state to the east of Colorado. From Colorado's eastern slope to the west, the U.S. government owns at least 15% of the land of every state. In most cases, it's a lot more than that. In my state, it's more like 2/3 of the land that's owned by the U.S. government. That's where a lot of our housing shortages tend to be the most acute. And that's where we have a lot of existing residential neighborhoods where there are vacant federal lots right next door in places people already live, next to utility hookups where people could buy homes. We should allow that and do so understanding that we would cap this at no more than a fraction of 1%. Less than 0.5% of federal land could even be considered for this.
Well, and Senator, I did actually pull. I was doing a little bit of research. I try to do my job around here because, actual journalists don't do any work. So in Nevada, that's the largest one. I think people have heard about this before. It's something a lot of conservatives have talked about for years. 80% is owned by the federal government. In you mentioned Utah, your state, yeah, 63%, the 2/3. Idaho, 61%, Alaska, 62%. President Trump has talked about drilling in Alaska, ANWR, for a long, long time. I've been to ANWR, by the way, something not a lot of people can say. I actually had the opportunity to go there. It is not a national park. It is not a place where it's muddy, it's oily, which makes sense because why you want to drill there, because there's so much oil. And so, and the wildlife is very, very sparse. And so, Senator, what would be, I suppose, your response to some of the claims that I've seen out there where people are saying that, well, hold on a second, isn't this just a backdoor way for BlackRock and Blackstone and the World Economic Forum type organizations to come in and buy up all this land and then rent it back to people, if they can't afford it, to mass ownership from private equity, and then get to that WEF slogan of you'll own nothing and you'll be happy? Are there provisions that would prevent things like that from happening? Is that separate from what's going on here? What do you say to those folks?
Yeah, it's one of the most commonly raised arguments. One being that entities like BlackRock will buy up all this land, and another being that the Chinese Communist Party and
Yes.
business enterprises associated or with it or owned by it will gobble all of this up. We're working on solutions right now to make sure that that never happens. Now, I don't believe that it would happen under the language. We're also working on additional solutions to make sure that it doesn't happen, that it can't happen. And there are all kinds of existing protections in existing law, some state law, some federal, that would discourage that. We're going to go even further than that to make sure that people understand this is not going to be a boondoggle for anyone. It's not going to be an opportunity for anyone other than individual families who want a place to live. We're going to keep out CCP ownership, and we're going to keep out BlackRock ownership, large institutional acquisition.
And so what would you say then, I guess, just I'm actually reading some of the comments as they come in. What would you say to the hunter in Idaho who grew up hunting on this land and is worried that his land might qualify for one of these sales?
If you're hunting on land, if you've got any activity like that, hunting, grazing, fishing, this land isn't going to be appropriate. It's not going to be deemed suitable for housing. And in all probability, in fact, with a virtual certainty, if there's land on which you've hunted, that's not going to be adjacent to existing residential developments, nor will it be suitable for housing. So this is not going to be part of that. Look, you can always identify some theoretical basis on which bad decisions could be made under any piece of legislation. But you can't just go throwing that around without looking at what the law actually says, looking at what the proposed legislative text that's before the Senate parliamentarian right now being reviewed actually says. When you read the text and understand the existing law behind that, these things are not legitimate concerns. Many of the people, not all of them, but many of the people making these arguments are the same people who, when pushed, will push back on any effort to reduce the federal land footprint by even 1/100% or even an acre. They're absolutists in this regard, and that's folly to assume that a U.S. government that owns between a fourth and a third of all land mass in the United States cannot shed even a single lot or two to allow hardworking Americans, families, to build their family home.
And this is something that I've been considering as well. I've spent a lot of time out there, either just traveling or for various military trainings that I've done, and there's huge swaths of the West that they're just not, we're not talking about the national parks, but it's just huge swaths of kind of nothing, where there's just really nothing there. And call me whatever you want for saying that, but it's just true, where it seems like it could be put to better use. And it seems as though there are ways that this could be used. And I've done hours and hours driving, through this area for various things. And so when it comes down to this, I think you do hear a lot of people, and it does become emotional because of. And by the way, this comes up in the context of the Alaska debate so much, where people have this image of Alaska that it's just this massive national park that people might want to visit one day. And there are the glaciers and the national park. It's amazing. It's absolutely amazing. By the way, we are Mount McKinley users around here, not Mount Denali. And so people miss the fact, though, that there are also vast swaths of Alaska that are completely untouched. They have drilling under them, and it wouldn't affect anything, but the environmentalists or other lobbies use that to prevent access to those resources.
Exactly. And look, if you've spent any time in Utah, I would encourage you to consider a drive between St. George in the south up to Ogden in the north on I-15. Now, driving on I-15 during that expanse, you'll travel most of the length of the state. You'll drive through a number of cities and towns. You won't drive through any wilderness areas or national parks because that's not how the interstate works. But you will drive through countless cities and towns, countless neighborhoods, communities where people live. Immediately next to those will be countless vacant lots, many of which are owned by the U.S. government. Those lots are not national parks. They're not suitable for wilderness area. They're not part of a national forest or any other protected federal land status category. They are most naturally and most beneficially used by the American people as housing because they're right next to housing and should be available for consideration for the construction of housing.